The Sixers continue to be a soap opera. So to get more into the soap opera that is the 76ers, it is the co-host of one of my favorite podcasts, the NBA podcast, Forbes Sports NBA contributor, Bryan Toporek joins us as the dumpster fire continues to burn and burn very intensely for the Philadelphia 76ers. Bryan, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Josh. One time, I just want to come on this show and have good things to talk about with the Sixers. Today is not that day, but one time this year.
No, and I've been saying it all week, Bryan. I feel like from last Friday through today, every single day, it's been a new thing. Shams had his interview last Friday. Then Shams has his article on Monday. Then Keith Pompey's report comes out on Tuesday. And then Joel Embiid goes on the tweet storm on Wednesday, right? And then today, The Athletic comes out with another article about the Warriors. It's like, this is no longer where there's smoke, there's fire. There's a blazing fire in front of us. What on earth are we doing about it?
Yeah, it is a volcano erupting. And, I mean, you had to see the writing on it has been on the wall for a while, but it certainly has escalated this week.
So let's start with the most recent information, okay? I thought The Athletic, which did an incredible job detailing the Warrior situation today, and I tweeted out some of the quotes from the article. It's very apparent that the Sixers think that their car that they're trading in, Ben Simmons, is worth way more than the dealership, which is the rest of the NBA. So what happens next? Like, what can happen next in this situation? Because you know as well as anyone, trading a contract like Ben Simmons is not simple, even if the player says, I want out of town.
Yeah, I mean, that's the $146 million question, isn't it? Because, Ben has, according to Keith Pompey of the Philadelphia Inquirer, Ben has told them he wants out. He is not planning to show up at training camp. So it's now up to Daryl Morey. Do you trade him at the discount because you're not getting the price that you are asking for, the exorbitant price that you've been reportedly asking for? Or do you try to call his bluff because this guy is under contract, a guaranteed contract for 4 more seasons? And, they can fine him if he does decide to hold out from training camp in the regular season. At that point, you have to worry about damaging relationships with Ben's agent, Rich Paul of Clutch Sports, who is also Tyrese Maxey's agent. There were some conflicting reports that came out earlier this week about whether Rich was trying to force Tyrese Maxey out of town as well. But, he has a large clientele, and you don't want to get him angry at you because that could affect negotiations with Maxey in the future, with other potential free agents. So I think at this point, I wouldn't be surprised if Morey was hoping cooler heads prevailed. And he realized I was not getting the offers I wanted. So from the Sixers' perspective, it would have been ideal if Ben would have just showed up. During the regular season, I think he would have at least washed some of the bad taste out of other GMs' mouths from that playoff meltdown. Because, the regular season and playoff basketball are two very different things. Ben Simmons has been an all-star for 3 straight years for a reason. He was runner-up in Defensive Player of the Year last year. Teams just don't have time during the regular season to game plan specifically for your weaknesses like they do in the playoffs. And even if they do, like, you can tell, your defense, okay, sag off of Ben. If he's got the ball 15 feet from the basket, he's not going to shoot. That's great. But there are still ways that as a series goes on, you become more and more familiar with someone's strengths and weaknesses. And, they deteriorate over the course of the series, which we saw against Atlanta. I don't think that would have been the case in the regular season. So, I don't think this is going to force Morey's hand here. I don't think he's going to panic trade Ben Simmons away for like the Buddy Hield Marvin Bagley package that we keep hearing about. But I think it does add some sense of urgency of, they were reportedly hoping to pry Damian Lillard out of Portland and use Ben Simmons as the big chip to get Dame out. If it doesn't seem like Dame is going to request a trade this year, if it seems like he's going to wait until next offseason, I don't think the Sixers have the luxury of waiting that long anymore.
I just don't understand why, and maybe this is just naive of me, so just correct me if I'm wrong. But at some point, Morey has to accept that he just might not get what he wants, right? Like at some point, okay, you might want Damian Lillard, but to get Damian Lillard, it might take way more than you really want to give up yourself. Like Simmons for Lillard is never going to happen. Like straight up. There's no way Portland is saying, oh yeah, we'll take a 3-time All-Star for a franchise superstar. Like it's just not going to happen. And to me, it's like after you give up to get Lillard, are you going to have a team left over? Like it's going to be a skeleton crew. Like, and by the way, I mentioned earlier, Brian, the Lakers and the Nets are like gobbling up every random free agent at this point. There's like Monte Ellis is working out for the Dallas Mavericks today. Like that's where we're at. Like if you trade for Lillard, you might not even have a team left over anymore. So like to me, I just feel like Lillard is a pipe dream at this point.
Yeah, I think this season it's seeming less and less likely. I mean, it seems like Dame seems annoyed enough that I don't think he's going to finish his contract out with the Blazers. When he asks out is the big question. It seemed like that might have bubbled over at some point this offseason, but maybe their acquisition of Larry Nance Jr. or they just signed Dennis Smith Jr. to a training camp deal. Maybe that's what pushes him over the edge and makes him. I think he wants to give Chauncey Billups a chance. They got Norman Powell at the trade deadline. He wants to see how this new look team works before deciding upon his future. So I think it seems more likely that next offseason is when he decides, no, I'm out. We're not of the caliber that we need to be, and there's nothing we can do to get there. I think the big hope otherwise would have been a Bradley Beal or a Zach LaVine, but the Bulls made such upgrades this offseason that I don't think Zach LaVine is a real candidate to leave Chicago next summer as a free agent. And the Wizards made some big moves as well, getting off of Russell Westbrook, improving their depth, getting Spencer Dinwiddie, Kyle Kuzma, KCP, Montrezl Harrell. Like they are a much better team on paper than they were last year. So I don't even know if Bradley Beal is available. I mean, he hasn't been. The Wizards have been batting away all potential suitors for a while now, even when it seemed hopeless. Like it seemed like he was going to leave. Now it seems more likely that he stays in Washington beyond next season. So yeah, I mean, if you're Morey and you're saying I want to turn Ben Simmons into a superstar, if it's not Dame, that player might not exist. So you might have to bite the bullet and realize, okay, we're going to be giving up the best player in this trade, but can we get pieces in, even if we look like quote unquote the losers of the trade? Can we get pieces in that either A, we can turn around and flip for a Damian Lillard if he does become available at some point? And in the meantime, can we just find guys that fit better with Joel Embiid, who finished second in MVP, is in the prime of his career? Like we just need to build around this guy, even if it comes at a minor loss in this Simmons trade.
Bryan Toporek joining us here on the Sports Bash on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, he's the co-host of the NBA podcast. Follow him on Twitter at @BToporek. Brian, my other question about this whole situation that I'm curious about, before we get to the Embiid tweet storm, because that was a whole other interesting side conversation at this point. We keep hearing the Timberwolves again and again and again. I feel like any report that is of anybody of legitimacy has mentioned the T-Wolves. But there's no way that's going to be a one-for-one deal, because the T-Wolves can't offer you what you really want. At the end of the day, the T-Wolves, for some reason, think that they can get Ben Simmons and pair him with Karl-Anthony Towns and Anthony Edwards and D'Angelo Russell, which I feel like they've been playing too much NBA 2K, but whatever. So my question to you is there going to come a point where the Sixers or the T-Wolves just start recruiting other teams to make a crazy trade? Because at the end of the day, to me, that's the only way a trade like that gets done.
Oh, I'm sure they've already been calling around. I mean, I think if there was a two-team framework that made sense, not just with the T-Wolves, but the Sixers and any team, that trade would be done already. I don't think that trade exists. I think the closest thing that's out there is the, Ben Simmons for CJ McCollum, which has been thrown around time and again. But as we just discussed, the Sixers want Damian Lillard. They're not going to try to give up Ben Simmons, who they would use to get Damian Lillard, and possibly make the Blazers better. So I don't think that deal is out there. As you said, if the Timberwolves aren't willing to give up any of the top 3 guys. I mean, hell, even if they aren't even willing to give up Towns or Edwards, and they would for Russell, I don't think Russell plus Malik Beasley plus Jaden McDaniels plus picks, whatever the case is, I don't think that's going to do it for the Sixers either. So yes, they need to recruit a third team where you can send some of that Timberwolves package, to a team that's either rebuilding or, further away from potentially contending for a title. Send that stuff to them. Send, the win now player back to Philly, and then send Simmons to Minnesota. So I think most likely, if or when this trade goes down, it's going to be a 3 or 4 team trade.
Brian, I want to get to the Embiid thing, because I think Embiid, in his Twitter storm, he actually brought up a point that I think that all of us who work in the media can appreciate. There is a level of people who are really not reporters putting out information, or fraudulent reports, who are putting out information to try to get clicks. They're putting out opinions, not really reports. And Embiid brings up a good point. There's a point in time where you just can't believe everything you read. And I think it's important to remind people that just because something's on the internet doesn't mean it's actually a report. And at some point, unless it's somebody credible reporting something, we can't just take everything out there and just run with it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you have to consider the source. So, of the top newsbreakers, and Adrian Wojnarowski or Shams Charania, Mark Stein, all of those people have spent years building up their credibility. So you more often than not can believe them, because they are plugged into the league and they have plenty of sources. I throw Chris Haynes in that mix as well.
Yep.
But yeah, then there are just random people on Twitter that show up and, put source : and then come up with some report, and they go viral. And then sometimes, as we saw with the Maxey thing earlier this week, you have to recant your entire report the next day. I think just vetting sources is difficult. You have to remember that, if someone is leaking information to you, there's a reason they're doing it. All of these sources have an agenda. Most of the time, this is stuff just coming from agents, as we've seen now, in the past year or two, especially. All the main newsbreakers, when they're breaking these free agent reports, are now just citing the agents instead of saying according to sources. Most of it's coming from the agents, but the agents have a reason to leak this information, or the team has a reason to leak this information. Other teams, rival teams trying to bid for Ben Simmons, have reason to leak damaging information about the Sixers and about this situation to kind of try to force the Sixers' hands here. So I would just advise everyone, as you're, reading all this stuff about, Ben Simmons, there's no coming back from this. He's mad at Doc Rivers. He's mad at Joel Embiid. The relationship is fractured. You just have to consider who's the one reporting it.
And of course, the other thing that Embiid tweeted was the end of the tweet storm, which I got to ask you about. Should we read into when Embiid says, quote, "I love the criticism. I love when I'm told I can't do something. It makes you work harder to prove everyone wrong, but not everyone is built like that," unquote. It's almost like Embiid goes through this whole thing, and then he just drops that at the end of the whole thing, like, oh, and we're not supposed to read into that?
Yeah. I think it's fair to read into it, because from what, I think multiple reports at this point have said, Ben was really offended by Doc's comments after Game 7, where someone asked him, do you think Ben Simmons can be a championship level player or point guard? And Doc said, I'm not sure. It wasn't championship level player. It was specifically point guard. Like, maybe that's just a critique of Ben Simmons, specific skill set, strengths and limitations. And can that translate as a point guard, or do you need another ball handler? Which I think is a fair question at this point. Because
right.
We've seen this time and again, over the last couple of years, and we keep running our heads into the wall, seeing the exact same thing unfold. So I think Doc, I said this on Twitter the other day, I was at a lot of the Sixers press conferences this year, and Doc was overly defensive of Ben throughout the year. I mean, just effusively praising him. Anytime someone brought up the lack of shooting, Doc would say, you're missing the point, focus on everything else that he brings to the table. And to some extent, he's right, because Ben, defensively and what he brings as a playmaker, the Sixers are going to miss that when they make this trade. And they're going to have to find ways to replace that when they make this trade. I think Matisse Thybulle, to some extent, can help replace the defensive impact of Ben Simmons. But, anytime I see a fake Ben Simmons trade that doesn't involve a playmaker, I'm like, great. Who's going to be the point guard for this team? Because they don't have one without him, even if you don't consider him a championship level point guard. So, I think it is fair to read into that Embiid tweet. And Danny Green has alluded to it as well. Different guys respond to criticism in different ways and coaching in different ways. And this is something that Doc and the front office really have to figure out. Like, it's the sign of a good coach that you don't just, it's one size fits all coaching. I'm just going to coach all my guys the same way. You got to figure out what works and doesn't work for your guys, how they respond to criticism, how they respond to feedback, and adjust your style accordingly.
He's Bryan Toporek. Give him a follow on Twitter at @BToporek. Make sure you subscribe and download the latest edition of the NBA podcast. Forbes Sports NBA contributor. Always good to talk with him about, like you said, one of these days we will talk about happier things with the Sixers. But for now, it's a dumpster fire. It's in the middle of our house. So
let's hope. I'm please have me on after the parade in a couple of years. That's all I ask.
All right, Bryan, take care.
All right, you too, Josh.